I like to think I would notice if something changed in my home. I live alone, so everything stays exactly where I leave it. If I set my keys on the counter, they'll be there when I get back. If I leave my bedroom door slightly open before bed, it will still be that way in the morning. That's why when I turned off the lights last night and glanced at my bedroom door, something immediately felt wrong. It took me a second to understand why, then my stomach dropped. A deadbolt, a heavy-duty lock installed on the outside. I stood frozen, my mind racing. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the cool metal. It wasn't mine. It wasn't supposed to be there. I would have noticed something like this before, wouldn't I? The screws looked clean, new, barely worn. I swallowed hard. Someone had installed this recently. I checked the rest of the apartment, my heart pounding. I knew I wouldn't find anything, but I needed to look. The windows locked, the front door locked, the spare key I kept hidden in a drawer still there. Everything was exactly as I had left it except for the lock on my door. I grabbed my phone and sent a text. Did maintenance come by today? There's a lock on my bedroom door that wasn't there before. No response. I checked the time, 11:47 p.m. I ran my fingers over the lock again, feeling a dull pressure in my chest. If it was maintenance, why wouldn't they tell me? If it wasn't, who did this? Why wouldn't they tell me? A lock like this only served one purpose, which was to keep someone inside. I turned the bolt to see if it worked, and it did. My throat tightened. Someone had installed this on my apartment door, and they had a key. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, eyes locked on my bedroom door, and every little sound made my skin crawl. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the pipes shifting in the walls, and the occasional creak of my neighbor's footsteps above me. Every time I heard something, I imagined a shadow standing on the other side of the door, someone waiting, someone listening, someone testing the lock. I hardly slept at all, but when my alarm went off, I had myself get out of bed. I checked my phone first, but my landlord hadn't responded. I considered phoning him, but something about this seemed too important to discuss over the phone. I had to check one more item before I went, even though I needed to meet him in person. I took my keys and went outside, shutting my bedroom door behind me. After taking a deep breath, I tested the lock and it turned easily. I felt a chill go up my spine. Whoever placed this there wasn't just trying to scare me. They wanted to make sure they could lock me inside. I left my apartment and went straight to the leasing office, where the receptionist hardly looked up from her computer. She said, "I need something," and pointed to the back, saying, "He's in his office." David scowled and pulled for his phone, saying, "I must have missed it." He glanced up from his desk, shocked that you hadn't responded to my text. "What's happening?" I paused for a while before deciding to simply say, "There's a new lock on my bedroom door." His eyebrows flew up when he saw that it wasn't there. Before I continued, "I'm not sure when or how, but it wasn't me." I asked David, "Do you have a list of people who have access to my apartment?" He nodded. "Just the maintenance team and me, and obviously whoever you gave a copy of your key to." I clenched my jaw. "Are you sure maintenance didn't install it?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure." He sighed and shook his head. "No one reported any work in your unit, and maintenance wouldn't just install a lock without telling you." When I asked David to check if there were any key card entries to your unit, he pulled up something on his computer and I leaned over his desk to watch the screen as he scrolled. When he stopped, his frown deepened, and I felt a chill run down my back. He said, "But it wasn't a staff key card, it was yours." I shook my head. "That's impossible, as I was at work." He gave me a perplexed look. "Are you sure?" I asked. taking out my phone and going through my messages. And then I showed him a text I had sent to a coworker at 2:30 p.m. last night. Someone had been in my apartment while I was at work, installing a lock that was intended to trap me inside. I gripped the edge of his desk, my nails digging into the wood. I told David that I wouldn't be coming home until after 6. He stared at the screen for a while before turning back to his computer. Then, someone used a duplicate of your key. I felt a chill go through me. Can you check security cameras? I questioned him. You should probably call the police, but David hesitated. The hall cameras don't record, they're just live feed. Of course they were. A few days after leaving the workplace, I took out my phone. I phoned 911 with trembling fingers. A dispatcher answered. What emergency do you have? I took a deep breath. Within 30 minutes, 2 officers, a man and a woman, entered my apartment and scanned the area as I explained the break-in, the lock, and the fact that someone had used a copy of my key while I was at work. Officer Patel asked, "You're sure this wasn't here before?" Patel asked positive, and I replied, "I would have noticed." She nodded and tested the lock. The person who installed this was skilled. Officer Green pointed to my front door and showed no traces of forced entry, so they either had a duplicate of your key or got in some other way. It's drilled and clean. There is no damage to the door frame, and my stomach is bent, indicating it wasn't a hurried job. The landlord said it was my key card, although I wasn't there when the apartment records showed an entrance at 2:34 p.m. yesterday. Patel and Green shared a glance that transformed the situation, and Green stated if someone had cloned your key, they may return at any moment. My flesh pricked. Could you look for fingerprints? The surface is too smooth, and if they were attentive, they most likely wiped it off, Patel said, shaking her head. Green closed his notebook. Do you know who may be interested in doing this? I hesitated, but I said, no, I don't have any enemies or stalkers. I live alone, and I don't give out my key. The cops seem to be certain that anybody could enter your flat in the past. Patel asked a friend or ex. I started to say anything, but then I stopped because I realized it was a former roommate, not an ex or friend. 6 months ago, I had briefly lived with someone named Daniel. We had only been roommates for a couple of months before I asked him to leave. He made me uncomfortable, not in a violent way. He was never aggressive, but in a quiet, unsettling way. He always knew too much about my schedule, always hovered a little too close, and once I caught him going through my closet when I got home from work early. I had confronted him about it, and he laughed, brushed it off like it was nothing. That night, I decided I didn't want to live with him anymore. I gave him 2 weeks to move out. He left without argument, but now what if he never really left? I told the officers everything. Patel's expression darkened. Did he ever return his key when he moved out? I felt my stomach drop. I don't know, I admitted. I assumed he did. Green scribbled something in his notepad. Do you have his last name? I nodded and gave them what little I knew. I didn't have his number anymore, but I still had old messages from when we first moved in. Together, Patel took a deep breath. We'll look into him. In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere else tonight. I exhaled, realizing how tense my body had been. Yeah, I already planned on it. Green handed me a card and said, call us if anything else happens, and don't go home alone until we clear this up. I took the card, my fingers still shaking, and left that night to stay with a friend across town. I had a feeling I knew exactly who it was, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel waiting outside my bedroom door, testing the lock. The next day, the police called and discovered Daniel living in an empty apartment on my floor. The apartment had been unoccupied for months, but the landlord had never changed the locks. While the police examined Daniel's home, they discovered tools, extra keys, a notebook with dates and times recording my schedule, and, worst of all, a second lock. Daniel must have copied his previous key and moved in while no one noticed. Another lock, much like the one he put on my door, even though he is in jail for breaking and entering, trespassing, and attempted unlawful imprisonment. I still check my doors every night because the thing that worries me the most isn't that he locked my bedroom door, but rather that he may have done it while I was asleep. The officers told me something I'll never forget. He was planning to do this to your front door. I moved out the same week and changed my number to make sure Daniel couldn't find me. I had never given my boyfriend's ex much thought. I knew her name was Lena, and I knew they had been together for 3 years before splitting up 6 months prior to our meeting. I knew he didn't like talking about her, so I didn't push why he would, but that was before the message before Lena vanished. On a Thursday night, I was at home, curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone while waiting for Owen to come over. I had had a long day at work and was partially preoccupied by a reality show playing in the background. Initially, I thought it was spam, but something forced me to check the unknown number. I must speak with you about Owen. I clenched my fingers around my phone. I hesitated before responding to Owen, my lover, but he almost instantly gave me an unfamiliar number. Lena, Owen's ex, and I had never talked or met before, and as far as I knew, she didn't even reside in the city anymore. Why was she messaging me now? 1,000 questions crossed my mind, but before I could send a reply, I scowled, knowing that he was lying when he said that I'm insane, jealous, and unable to let go. I thought that was because it had been a difficult breakup because Owen had never really talked about her at all. He had only ever mentioned that things ended badly and he didn't want to bring it up, but he had never called her crazy. Was she assuming he did? I stared at the message, not knowing what to say, and then another text from Lena. I can't tell more, but please believe me when I advise that you must exercise caution. I felt a shiver of caution about him, but before I could write anything, my phone chimed again. I read the message again, my pulse racing, and it seemed like a warning. If anything were to happen to me, don't trust what he says. A frantic one, followed by quiet. I wrote back, "What do you mean?" but got no reply. A cold pit formed in my stomach as I waited for the typing bubble to appear on the computer. I dialed the number, but it only rang once before going straight to voicemail. A tap at the door almost made me jump. My heart was still pounding as I glanced up at the message. Oh, and I took a deep breath trying to steady myself before getting up and opening the door. He smiled at me, the same easy, charming smile that had drawn me in when we first met. "Hey babe," for the first time I hesitated before letting him, and I wanted to ask him about Lena, about what had happened between them, about why she would send me a message like that, but I didn't. Instead, I forced a smile and stepped aside, letting him inside, because I needed more time to think, because I wasn't ready to hear his answer, because for the first time since I met him I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. I tried to act normal. I let Owen and kissed him on the cheek and pretended like everything was fine, but inside my mind was racing. Lena's message was burnt into my brain. "You need to be careful, please. I can't say more. Just trust me. If anything happens to me, don't believe what he tells you." I sat across from Owen, on the couch pretending to listen as he talked about his day. He was laughing about something a coworker did, completely unaware of the tight knot in my stomach. I wanted to ask him, I wanted to demand answers, but I hesitated. What if Lena was lying? What if she really was just the jealous ex? Would bringing it up make me seem paranoid, or worse, would it make Owen angry? I nodded when appropriate and attempted a grin, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Lena never responded to my texts, so I kept checking my phone until Owen noticed everything was fine. He asked, gesturing toward my phone, and I nodded too quickly and unnaturally. "Yeah, just work stuff," I said, lying. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then smiled and stretched, wrapping an arm around me as if nothing was wrong, but I couldn't relax when she vanished the following day. I tried calling her again, but the number went straight to voicemail. I checked her social media, but there were no updates, and I even Googled her name, but nothing strange turned up. She simply stopped talking to me. I told myself that I was overreacting and that perhaps she had changed her mind about warning me. If Owen didn't tell me, maybe someone else would, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. So I decided to find out more about their breakup. That afternoon, I discovered Mia, who was, at least based on social media, one of Lena's old friends, because they used to tag each other in posts and comment on each other's photos. I messaged her, "Hey, this is really random, but I wanted to ask you something about Lena. I've been dating Owen," and I was hesitant to continue until she sent me a strange message the other day. She seemed afraid of him, but she isn't responding. I just wanted to know if you've spoken to her recently. I stared at my phone, waiting, and Mia read the message almost instantly. After a long pause, she began typing, "Get away from him." My blood ran cold. "Get away from him, please." My heart is pounding in my ears, and I'm holding onto my phone harder. "What happened? Do you know?" Mia, she was afraid of him. He never physically assaulted her, as far as I know, but he was domineering. He would gaslight her, isolate her, and track her phone, showing up at unexpected locations. When she finally ended their relationship, she vowed that he was still watching her, and I swallowed hard because that didn't sound like the owl. But did I really know him? I paused before typing one more. She told me that she had to caution me not to trust him if anything were to happen to her. Mia responded very immediately, and then she got into trouble. Lena hadn't been lying. She wasn't just some jealous ex attempting to frighten me away. She was scared, and now she was gone. This made me feel terrible. With my hands shaking, I sat motionless on my couch and read through the messages again. I needed to talk to Owen and find out what he wasn't telling me, but if Lena was right and Owen was truly dangerous, then facing him head-on could be the worst thing I've ever done. I was at a loss for what to do next, so I just stared at my phone screen while Mia's words kept repeating in my mind. She's in trouble. Lena had attempted to warn me, but since she was no longer with me, I had to decide whether to face Owen or call the police. I had a gut sense that something was really wrong, but I had no evidence other than a few texts. I took a deep breath and performed the one action I should have taken sooner. The last time I called Lena's number, I didn't expect a response. This time, the phone rang twice, then 3 times, and then someone answered. I jumped up and said, "I'm almost breathless, and I can hear faint, shaky breathing like someone was trying to stay quiet." I swallowed hard. "Lena, are you okay?" Where are you?" A chill went through my entire body, and before she could answer, the call cut off. I stood there, my heart pounding, and I dialed 911 right away. When the dispatcher answered, I forced myself to speak clearly. I explained that my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend was missing, and that she tried to warn me about him. I called her, and she answered, but she sounded scared. The dispatcher took me seriously and asked for details. I told them all I knew, including Lena's full name, Owen, and the last time I saw her, and then something occurred to me. Owen had mentioned that Lena still had some of her old things in a storage unit. What if she was there? I told the dispatcher send officers to check it out. She assured me. I felt like I could finally breathe. 15 minutes later my phone buzzed. An officer named Detective Ellis called me back. We found her, he said. I nearly collapsed onto the couch in relief. Is she okay? She's shaken up, he admitted, but she's alive. I shut my eyes trying to steady myself. Where was she? I asked. There was a long pause, and then the words that made my blood run cold. In Owen's storage unit. I sat there gripping the phone. She was locked inside. I whispered, "Yeah." The detective sighed. She was dehydrated, scared out of her mind, but she said she had only been there since last night. That means someone put her there recently. I felt sick. Owen, that's what we're going to find out. That night Owen was arrested, and the police questioned him. He denied everything, said he had no idea how Lena got into his storage unit, but the evidence stacked against him. Elena told the police he had been stalking her for months. He would show up at her work, her gym, even outside her apartment. She had blocked his number, but he always found ways to contact her, and when she sent me that warning message, he must have found out, because that night she had been walking home and someone had grabbed her. Someone had thrown her into his storage unit and left her there. She may not have arrived if I hadn't phoned, and the police hadn't checked, but it took some time before Owen was charged with abduction and illegal confinement. Following months of court fights, Owen was given an 8-year jail term after Lena and I both testified against him. Lena tried to warn me, and because I listened, she's still alive, and Owen is exactly where he belongs. I haven't spoken to him since his arrest because I don't want to, but occasionally I wonder what would have happened if I had disregarded her message that night and written her off as just another resentful ex.